All right. Last week we had our first evening in the book of Job. And what we tried to do last week is we tried to set the scene as if we were looking into heaven and we were seeing the God on his throne and his heavenly court around him. And as his court gathers, then we have the coming of the Satan, this accuser who has come along. And God focuses attention on this man, Job, this blessed man on the earth, and he brings him to the attention of the accuser. And the question that is raised in heaven is about the relationship between piety and blessing, or faith in God and prosperity in this life. And when we left the scene, we left with that question ringing in our ears. God had pointed to Job as this righteous man, and the Satan had said, he only follows you, he only loves you, he only obeys you because you have blessed him, because you have made him rich. And the last thing we heard was, behold, all that he has is in your hand. Only against him do not stretch out your hand. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. So we're in one of those cliffhangers that you get in the soap operas. One of those moments in time where you're sitting thinking, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen to Job? How is this question going to be answered? Well, we're going to begin by reading from verse 13 down to verse 19, where we read exactly what happened to Job whenever the Satan left God's presence. And it says this: Now there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And there came a messenger to Job and said, The oxen were ploughing and the donkeys feeding beside them, and the Sabeans fell upon them and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, The fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, The Chaldeans formed 3 groups and made a raid on the camels and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. And while he was yet speaking, there came another and said, Your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, and behold, a great wind came across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell upon the young people, and they are dead. And I alone have escaped to tell you. Satan has left God's presence with this command: all that is in his hand, or all that is his, is in your hand, only do not touch his life. And the Satan does a thorough job on Job and all that he owns. We have to, I think, for a moment, contemplate the savagery of the situation, the enormity of what Job is hearing here. At the beginning of the book of Job, we read that list. The thousands of camels, the thousands of sheep, all of this livestock that he had gathered up over the years, all this that was his wealth and his greatness as a man in the East. And we thought about his family, all these lovely sons and daughters who used to celebrate their birthdays together in each other's houses, and whom Job was so interested in, so concerned for spiritually, that he made sacrifices for them in case they had sinned against the Lord. And as we read it, this brief few verses, its brevity and the matter-of-fact nature of its description is so powerful, isn't it? The savagery of the Sabeans who came in and destroyed all that they could find. The ferociousness of the fire of God when it fell. And this isn't just a lightning strike. This is thousands of sheep and goats that are destroyed along with their keepers. The greed of the Chaldeans as they came in and took the camels, and the greatness of the wind that destroyed the home of the elder brother and killed all who were in that house. Everything Job loved, everything Job had gathered up, everything Job had, everything that was seen as evidence of his blessing and evidence of what he had accomplished, is gone in a moment. It's destroyed absolutely and completely. That's what we're meant to see. His wealth is gone. And we can only imagine how terrible that situation would be. To be in Job's place and to understand that God has removed his hand of protection and everything that you had is destroyed. Just imagine if that happened to you or I. Imagine not just the one person that we love, but all the people that we love gone. Imagine our home gone. Imagine all that we had gone. We would imagine it would be one of those times when we would question, does God love me? Does God care? What have I done to deserve such a thing? But then we look and we see what Job's response was. We have our first slide. There's a question that has been posed in heaven about wealth and suffering, about piety and suffering. And Job has had his blessings taken away. And here's what we see happens in Job 1, 20-22. Then Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell on the ground and worshipped. And he said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. Friends, with Job, we have this exemplar, this picture of what it is to be so crushed by the hand of God. We see it in how he responds to what happened. The first thing we notice about him, Job mourned. Job mourned what had happened. There was no pretending that everything was okay. You know, we so often, even as Christians, we're so often trying to hide our emotions, trying to hide how we feel about particular situations, trying to show that we're stronger than we are. We don't get that impression from Job. There's no stiff upper lip that he's trying to keep, no pulling himself together and keeping himself under control, no just accept it and get on. No, here we see Job tearing his robe, that traditional sign of mourning, and shaving his head, removing the hair of his head, and just falling on the ground. But do you notice what it says? And it says he fell on the ground and he worshipped. Here's Job, and he is in mourning. He is not unmoved by what has happened at all. These are the people he loves. And yet, even in his mourning, he does not impugn God at all. He doesn't say, God doesn't love me. He doesn't say, God, you've been unfair. He doesn't say, God, why did you do this? You don't know what you're talking about. Instead, he just bowed his head and he worshipped his God. He lifted up his heart in praise and honor to his God, resting in who God is. And we see how his worship went. He reasoned in his heart, I am just a man. Isn't that what he says? Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. There's no special pleading here from Job, do you see? Job doesn't say, I'm a godly man. He doesn't say, I'm a righteous man, even though we know he is. That was God's estimation of him. No, in this instance he says, I'm just like everybody else. Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. There is discussion over what that means, because we know that he doesn't want to go back into his mother's womb. That doesn't seem to make sense. But it seems to be about going down into the grave. We have something similar in Psalm 139 where he says, you formed my inward parts, you knitted me together in my mother's womb. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in the being secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. There seems to be this commonality between the mother's womb as the place you come from, and then the depths of the earth where you go to when you die. And Job is making that expression. He says, I've come here as a normal man. I didn't come with all this wealth. I didn't come with all these goats and these camels. I didn't come with all these children. I came onto the earth and all I had was myself. And everything was given to me by my mother and by God. And then there will become a day, he knew, when he was going to leave it all behind him. Job reasoned in his heart, I'm just a man, and this is what happens to human beings. He's resting in his humanity and the fact that any blessing that he did have was God-given. And then what we notice is not only does he reason that he is just a man, but he rests in who God is. He rests in who God is. He says, the Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Job's not forcing a smile. He's not performing for a crowd. He's not putting on a show. He's not trying to pretend to be stronger than he actually is. He goes back to what he knows. He goes back to what he understands of God. He goes back to the basics. You notice he says he doesn't just say it's God who gives. He says it's God who gives and takes. It's God's right to give me what he wants to give me and to take from me what he wants to take from me. There's this absolute confidence in the sovereignty of God and his right to make these sorts of decisions. He understands that God has allowed tragedy to come into his life. He knows he's had years of good times. He knows he's had years of blessing. And now tragedy has come. But there is no blame on God. He understands that God has his ways. That God knows why it ought to be so. And God is still good. He blessed the Lord. Job takes confidence, even in his sorrow. And I know later on in the other chapters we'll think about all the things that are going on in his heart and mind and all the things that go around this decision. But at this moment, in the very embryonic stage of this disaster, when his family and his wealth has been taken, his immediate response is to fall down before God and worship him and bless God's name because God knows what he's doing. Just in these, we get the answer to the question, don't we? Or is piety tied to riches? In Job's case, that is definitely not the case. Instead, Job shows us how to suffer well, even when our riches are taken from us, even when our wealth is destroyed, even when what we love is taken away. David Klein says, no more sudden or catastrophic suffering could easily be imagined. How should a human being respond? Precisely as Job, without recrimination, self-pity, or rejection of reality, and with praise to the Lord of his being. There is a question has been asked in heaven. It has been raised by the Satan. It's on the mind of God's heavenly family who are there to hear and to witness what's going on. And with Job's response to catastrophe, they have their answer. They understand. A man can still be righteous. A man can still love God even when all his wealth, even when everything he loves has been taken away. What I found most striking about this in particular was the fact of Job's mourning and how in that sorrow he came to be a man who was worshipping. Friends, we all face sorrow. Some of it is fresher in our lives than others, but it comes to all of us. People we know are taken from us. Things that we hoped for are removed from our view. Things we had are taken. And we go into times of mourning because we wonder why that is the case. But if Job tells us anything in these early verses, he tells us and he shows us that mourning is an opportunity to worship our God, to rest in who He is, to know ourselves and know our situation, but also to get to know God more fully. And that seems to be what Job did in answer to the question and the query posed by God and the Satan. But what happens next? The next slide. The question takes another turn. We go a little bit deeper into this question because something else is brought to the fore. We go to Job chapter 2 and verses 1 to 6. It says there, "Again there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them to present himself before the Lord. And the Lord said to Satan, 'From where have you come?' Satan answered the Lord and said, 'From going to and fro on the earth and from walking up and down on it.' And the Lord said to Satan, 'Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in all the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil? He still holds fast his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without reason.' Then Satan answered the Lord and said, 'Skin for skin. All that a man has he will give for his life, but stretch out your hand and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse you to your face.' And the Lord said to Satan, 'Behold, he is in your hand, only spare his life.'" So we're back to a similar scene that we had in chapter 1. In fact, the first 4 verses or so are almost a direct copy of what has gone before. We have this scene in heaven again where God is there, where the sons of God, the angels, the archangels, the cherubim, all those beings that we understand as making up that council are there, and the Lord speaks to the Satan, points to him, and says, "Well, what about my man Job? What about my man Job?" And we have this added testimony. "He still holds fast his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without reason." And so God's pointing to the Satan and says, "Listen, you were wrong. You were wrong in what you said. Are you going to admit it? Are you going to admit that the answer has been given?" But the Satan says, "No, skin for skin," he says. Skin for skin. God has protected Job's life. He's allowed his possessions to be taken. But while one level of protection was taken down, another was raised to make sure that his life was not touched. And Satan's accusation is, well, listen, he worships you because you blessed him with all of his possessions. But as you protected his life, you continued to bless him. You continued to put a hedge around him. He still has the blessing of life. He hasn't betrayed you because he still has the gift of life. Touch that, and things will change. Then the answer will be different. Then the answer will be different. Skin for skin, he says. There are numerous queries about how to decipher this particular phrase. There's a lot of debate about what it means. The one that seemed to help me most is the one that I have on the screen there. And it talks about the skin for skin being about not what has already happened to Job, but about what is about to happen to Job. It's by Olshausen. And it says this: "Only when you strike at a man's life will you see of what temper his piety is. He has given up his possessions in exchange for his life. But now that he has only his life, attack that, and you will find that he attacks you in the only way that he knows how, by cursing you, assaulting your life, your skin for his skin." And what Olshausen is saying here is that if you touch his skin, if you touch his life, then he will attack you. He will curse you, God. He will not only that will he not worship you, but he will curse you. That's the skin for skin. And that's what the Satan expects. He expects that Job's piety is still tied up with the blessing, with the work of God in his life, that he loves God only because of what he gets from God. But that it'll all change if God touches his flesh. And just as he did before, God allows the question to be answered. Isn't it interesting? If this was a human king, he would have struck the Satan down for being so insolent, wouldn't he? He would have said, "Silence, don't want any more from you. You're talking rubbish." He would have put him away, but not the God of heaven and earth. No, the question is going to be answered. It was answered in the beginning, and now it's going to be answered again. And so God sends the Satan away with the command, you can touch his flesh, but not kill him. God is going to make sure that his heavenly family know the answer to the question. Do you see how important it is? Because when the Satan is raising these queries, raising these doubts, raising these ideas that can be seen to impugn God's authority, then it means it's within his angelic host. It's within his divine counsel. The same question is ringing, and they want to know the answer, and God is going to make sure that they understand the answer. We go to the next slide. The question is answered, but it also finds a new audience. Verses 7 to 10 of Job chapter 2 says this, So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and struck Job with loathsome sores from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. And he took a piece of broken pottery with which to scrape himself while he sat in ashes. Then his wife said to him, Do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die. But he said to her, You speak as one of the foolish women would speak. Shall we receive good from God? And shall we not receive evil? In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. We see two aspects of what happened in the Satan's second visit to Job. The first thing we notice is that his flesh is struck with sores. He's covered in sores. That's what we're being told here. There's not a piece, we get the idea, there's not a piece of his flesh that's not being touched by this awful situation that he's in. Every aspect of physical blessing has now been removed. His wealth, his family, and his own health. His whole personhood has come to grief. Once he was the greatest man in the East, but now he's sitting outside of the village of the city on the ash heap. He's sitting there for all to see, and he's there scraping pottery along his skin to try and get some relief from these sores that are on his flesh. He who has once been at the top of society, who was once at the very pinnacle of that place that he was in, is now in the place of degradation, and everybody is there to see it. Physically, everything he has been taken from him. But what I found fascinating even more was his spiritual flesh has been taken from him too, because here we have his wife introduced. She is the one whom he's married to. She is the one with whom he is counted as one flesh. She is the one who is the other part of who he is. And now she derides him for continuing on in his integrity. Do you notice her testimony? She confesses that Job is a righteous man. You know, he's living in integrity. He's living as one who seeks to love God, and his wife knows it. She sees it, and she wonders why. Why are you continuing to do it after God has done this to you? Do you notice that when she speaks with the words that the Satan used in God's presence? Curse God and die. That's exactly what the Satan said Job would do whenever God touched his flesh. He said he would curse you and die. And now Job's wife, his spiritual flesh, is saying the very same to the man. Curse God and die, tempting Job to renounce God. And of course, what she's also doing is reflecting the wrong answer to the question. She's reflecting Satan's answer to the question. She's reflecting society's answer to the question. She's reflecting a human answer to the question. Is piety the result of blessing? There's no point in being pious if you're not blessed. There's no point in worshipping God if He doesn't protect you, if He doesn't look after you, if He doesn't care for you, if He doesn't give to you. It's a very argument we get against God today, which people say, well, why bother believing in God because all of these evil things still happen? The same question is here. And Job's wife is the one who's taking it up, and he's presenting it to Job in his most awful situation. And we can understand why. Job's wife has been through a lot as well, hasn't she? Everything that Job has suffered, she has suffered. It's her family. It's her wealth. It's her home. It's everything that she has known has been taken away. But she hasn't worshipped God. Instead, she has seen God as one taking what she deserves. That piety was only worth it as long as she was given wealth. Job remains confident in God. Do we notice? You speak as one of the foolish women would speak. The women who don't know God. The women who haven't seen the things that God has done. The women who haven't understood God, who haven't walked with God all these years. You're being foolish. He obviously considers his wife an intelligent woman. He obviously considers his wife as one who has walked with him through these difficult times and through the blessed times, who has seen God's hand. And yet he says to her, you're talking as one of these foolish women. Why would you talk like that? We know God. We know God gives and takes. We know God has the right to give good and to also send evil if He so chooses. Why would you talk like one of the foolish women? And it tells us once again that Job did not sin with his lips. Friends, I think in Job's wife we see one of the dangers of suffering and allowing it to turn our eyes away from God. Because that's what suffering does at times, isn't it? For so many people, suffering gets our eyes off God because we think, if I'm suffering, God doesn't love me. If I'm going through tragedy, then I have done something to deserve it. If I'm in difficulty, then God is somehow punishing me. And yet that is not always the case. Yet that's where Job's wife thinking went to. She turned from God. She refused to worship. We only read of Job worshipping. We don't read of Mrs. Job worshipping at all. And we hear in her words, and we hear in her thinking that she's listening to the guidance of Satan or to the world. She's going along with everyone else, not with the one who actually knows God, not with the one who is righteous in all his ways and has not sinned with his lips. She's listening to other voices and following what they say. Friends, this is one of the most important things we understand as Christians, because we understand we don't live life on our own. As believers, we are part of the body of Jesus Christ. We have perhaps partners. We have Christian friends. When we come to church, we have Christian friends who gather around us in times of difficulty. And the thing about community, the thing about walking in community together, is that we're able to minister to each other in tragedy and in difficulty. Very few of us will face trouble that others in this room have not faced also. Very few of us will go alone through those difficult situations unless we choose to not seek help and comfort and encouragement from our brothers and sisters in the Lord. Friends, we don't want to be there. We want to be the people who are able to minister to each other and lift each other up and direct each other to stop us from going down the wrong path, from taking the wrong thinking into each situation. That's why God has given us the church as His gift to us to keep us on the right path. We long to be a help to those in need, and we long to be helped whenever we are in need. And we can only do that when we trust each other and when we build up a relationship with each other and know that trust is well earned. But what we notice too, as we come into the end of this chapter, is that with Mrs. Job's confession, with Mrs. Job's encouragement to her husband, we understand that the question that was asked in heaven, and then answered whenever Job went through his trouble, and then answered again whenever it was intensified. So we know that Job does believe in God, even when his health is taken from him. That question has reached earth. It's in Mrs. Job's lips. And then as we come to verses 11 to 13, we have these three famous friends who come to our attention. It says, "Now when Job's three friends heard of all this evil that had come upon him, they came each from his own place. Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shushite, and Zophar the Naamathite. And they made an appointment together to come to show him sympathy and comfort him. And when they saw him from a distance, they did not recognize him, and they raised their voices and wept. And they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads toward heaven. And they sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights. And no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his suffering was very great." A period of time has elapsed, and these men have organized to go and visit with Job, to be a comfort to him. They are good friends. They want to be there for their brother. They want to be there and be a help. And there's some really interesting things that happen. It says that as they approached, they seemed afar off and they didn't recognize him. And then they realized how much he was suffering, and they too tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads. And isn't it amazing? It says they sat with him on the ground for 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him. Could you imagine that? Imagine someone coming and sitting with you in your grief. 7 days and 7 nights, they don't speak a word to you. I wonder what went on. They must have talked with each other. They must have talked with Mrs. Job. But perhaps they left Job to his situation. I know in some situations it was for the grieving man to break the silence. But 7 days and 7 nights is an incredible amount of time, isn't it? Have you ever tried to keep quiet for 20 minutes? I know Molly hasn't. But, sorry Molly. But it's hard work. Keeping quiet for 20 minutes is hard work. I don't know how you keep quiet for 7 days and 7 nights. I couldn't possibly do it. But here we see it set for us. But we see, the whole point is for us to see the depth of the grief that this man's going through. And we can only imagine Job's friends as they try to come to terms with what they're seeing. They're trying to understand why their friend is going through this. Perhaps they are being influenced by Job's wife in their conversation with her. Perhaps they are just overwhelmed by the suffering that is coming upon him, for it does say that he is suffering greatly. I wonder, are they asking the question that heaven asked about the relationship between piety and blessing? Only they're turning it around, aren't they? We know from later on that they will turn it around. They're trying to understand what sin Job has committed in order to get himself in such a predicament. You see, they too believe that piety and blessing go hand in hand. And so the question that was raised in heaven has now come to earth, and it's in the heart of these three men. And it's in the heart of Job's wife. And God is going to give the answer. And the meat of the book of Job is going to be bringing that answer to bear. Our last slide is this. It says, a quote by Frank Retief, probably one of the hardest aspects of suffering to endure is the fact that our suffering is not explained. It would be much easier if we knew why. What's interesting is Job, nor his wife, nor his friends have any idea about what went on in heaven. They don't know about the Satan. They don't know about the sons of God. They don't know about these great encounters with God himself and what God has said. He doesn't know anything about it. All he knows is that all he has been taken away. God's hand has turned against him, and even his wife thinks it's worthless to follow God if it doesn't mean that you're going to be wealthy. This is where Job is, as he sits in ashes with his friends as they wait in silence for someone to speak. At this point in the book of Job, I think we learn three things. The first thing is this: the pious do suffer, just like everybody else. We can suffer in our circumstances and in our flesh, and sometimes there is no reason for it. At least there's no reason that we know of. We can all rehearse the different reasons that God allows suffering to come, but we know that sometimes suffering just comes. That our blessings are not an evidence that we are doing well, and our suffering is not an evidence that we're doing badly in God's eyes. It can be exactly the other way around. Piety can lead directly to suffering. This is what happened to Job. Job was suffering because he was holy, because he was a righteous man. He was suffering for being good, for loving God, because God pointed to him as one who was righteous. And that's striking. But also that the power of piety, the power of faith, the power of walking with God is that when we do suffer, we suffer differently. Job gives us the example. Our worship, or our mourning, our sorrow, our struggle is not just noise. It's worship. Whenever we turn to God in our sorrow, whenever we turn to the God that we know when things are going wrong, when we turn to the God we know when our bodies are not working properly, even our mourning can be worship. Isn't that amazing? We know the answer to the question that's set before us. We know that piety has nothing to do with wealth. But the question is, as we look through the rest of this book, will the earth answer differently? How will it all play out whenever we get into the heart, into Job's heart, and seek to understand what he's thinking, even as he confesses to the power and the authority of God? We just rest that we will learn and we will understand and that we will know. Amen.